Okay, so we can begin now. And we'll start with 3 bows to the Buddha. So if you have a Buddha image in front of you, you can bow to that. If not, you just visualize an image of the Buddha. And so we bow 3 times. 2, 3. And then we recite the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And today is December 12th, 2020. And we're continuing now with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya. That's the numerical discourses of the Buddha. And we're in the Book of Fours. And we come now to a new chapter. We're in the second set of 50, actually the third set of 50, and the second chapter within that set of 50. And this sutta, this chapter is going to have a number of suttas which revolve around similes involving horses. And it's very interesting. I just was reflecting a short while ago how so many of the suttas of the Buddha revolve around similes. What should be the reason why the similes are so prominent in the suttas? Yeah, so one thing occurs to me, this is part of the Buddha's skill in teaching. In fact, it becomes like one of the factors in the Indian system of logic, if I remember correctly. And the system of logic developed much later, in later centuries. But some of the schools of logic held that a good logical argument has not only the actual logical steps of the argument, but it should include the upama. The upama means the simile. So in these suttas, we don't have logical arguments, but the simile, I think, serves as part of the Buddha's skillful means of teaching to impress a teaching or a principle upon the mind. Since we remember, let's say, more clearly, more distinctly, when an abstract principle is illustrated by a concrete, usually a visual image, helps us to preserve it in the mind. And this was probably especially the case during the time when the Buddha was teaching, when spiritual teachings were not written down, but they were presented, preserved, and transmitted orally from teachers to pupils. They would have to memorize the teaching. And so in order to make it easier to preserve a teaching in memory, a simile would be attached to the abstract principles of the teaching. We see this in the Satipatthana Sutta in the case of the mindfulness of the body or contemplation of the body section, where we have the section on mindfulness of breathing, in and out breathing, is illustrated by a lathe operator. Operating a lathe. And then we have for the simile, for the 31 parts of the body, contemplating the parts of the body, illustrated with the simile of a man who has a sack with different kinds of beans and grains in it. And he opens up the sack and spills them out, looks inside, and he could say, see, those are peas, those are kidney beans, those are black beans, those are lentils, and so on. And then the section on the contemplation of the four elements is illustrated by the simile of a butcher who takes a cow and cuts it into sections and puts them up for sale in the market. So when you look at the parts of the cow on sale in the market, you don't think those are parts of a cow. The mental image of the cow disappears, and you just see pieces of meat for sale. And so when you divide the body into the four elements, you lose the perception of a living being and just see four elements. Yeah, anyway, so here we're going to come to a group of suttas which involve similes of horses. And so now we're taking the first of these. This is number 111, in which the Buddha is speaking to a horse trainer by the name of Casey. And so the Buddha, interesting, here the Buddha opens the conversation. Usually somebody comes to the Buddha and asks the Buddha a question. But here the Buddha opens the conversation by saying to him that you are said to be a horse trainer. So how do you discipline or train a horse to be tamed? Okay, so, and then the Casey, the horse trainer, says, I discipline one kind of horse gently, another kind sternly. Yeah, the Pali word parusena also could be translated harshly, roughly. And then another kind of horse he trains both gently and sternly or harshly. Then the Buddha says, if you get a horse and it won't submit to training by any of these methods, what do you do with him? And then the horse trainer, obviously he's not yet a Buddhist disciple, he says, if the horse won't submit to training by any of these methods, then I kill him. And what is the reason? So that there won't be any disgrace to my teacher's lineage or guild. So he has to preserve the honor of the guild. And so if they get a horse that won't submit to training, it seems a bit rough to me to kill it. I don't see why he couldn't just let it go into the wild. Okay, but now, and this is a little bit where this earlier part of the sutta is a kind of setup, because here it builds into one of the designations of the Buddha as the Anguttara Dhammasarati. And if you remember, if some of you have participated in the retreat that we had a couple of weeks ago on the 4 protective meditations, including the recollection of the Buddha. So one of the 9 standard epithets or designations of the Buddha is Anguttara Dhammasarati. So Anguttara is unsurpassed. Purisa is a person, a little bit like the English word. Dhamma is to be tamed, to be trained. And Sarati, it's a trainer of horses, a trainer of elephants. And so the Buddha is the unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed. So how does the Buddha tame or train a person to be tamed? Then the Buddha he echoes the words of Casey. He says, I have these three methods: the gentle method, the stern or harsh method, and then the method that combines the gentle and the harsh approaches. Okay, so what is the gentle method? So here the Buddha just uses an example. So he says, this is bodily good conduct, and this is the result of bodily good conduct. This is verbal good conduct. This is the result of verbal good conduct. This is mental good conduct. This is the result of mental good conduct. Those are the devas, and these are human beings. So just to elaborate on this, generally we have a scheme of 10 types of good conduct, 10 types of kusala karma, wholesome karma, also called 10 types of sucharita, of good conduct. So the bodily good conduct, refraining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. The 4 kinds of verbal good conduct, what are they? My memory, I'm getting old, my memory is getting cloudy. 4 kinds of verbal good conduct. Anybody?
Timely and not harsh, and
Wait, start again.
At the right time and gentle speech.
Non-frivolous speech.
Let's get them in the correct order. No guessing. You have to know exactly.
No lying.
Okay, go on.
And no divisive speech.
Right.
And no gossip. No gossip is the last one. And number 3 is hang on. Divisive speech is the number 4.
Harsh speech.
Harsh speech.
Wait,
Sorry.
One person at a time. One person at a time.
Harsh speech. Yeah, no harsh speech.
Yeah.
Kindly.
And fourth?
And no divisive speech. And
that's the second. Go on.
And no gossip.
Right. Okay, so you got all 4. So no false speech or lying, no divisive speech that creates divisions, conflicts between people, no harsh or angry speech, and no gossip or idle chatter. So those are the 4 kinds of verbal good conduct. And then there are 3 kinds of mental good conduct. What are the 3 kinds of mental good conduct?
Avihimsa.
It's not mentioned amongst them.
Loving kindness, equanimity.
No.
No.
Have to get exactly.
Renunciation.
Refraining from sensual desire.
No.
Nikamma.
No. You have to get familiar. This is the basic framework of Buddhist ethics.
No greed, non-anger, non-delusion.
No.
Maintaining
close.
Virtue, generosity, and no.
Non-violence.
Everybody's guessing.
Wholesome actions, Bhante? Is it making an effort to maintain wholesome?
No.
How about non-greed, non-ill will, and non-harming?
Non-harmingness.
Those are 3 kinds of good thoughts. But in the 10, wait, one person.
Mithya drishtiya, patigaya, vijja domanasa.
Answers have to be in English. Kathy, did you want to? I see your hand is up. Oh no, there's somebody else. There's another Chen. Okay, I'll have to tell you, but I'm really disappointed. Okay, non-covetousness, non-ill will, and right view. This is the list of the 10 types of wholesome karma you find in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Tens, towards the end. Book of Tens, number, let's say 176, you'll find them explained in detail. You have to learn those 10, the 10 types of bad conduct, the 10 types of good conduct. Okay, so this is the Buddha's gentle method. First, you explain what is good conduct of body, speech, and mind, then the result of good conduct of body, speech, and mind. Various results, but I think the reason the Buddha here, he mentions devas and human beings, because when the good conduct takes on the role of generating rebirth, it leads to rebirth either among the devas, that is in the sense sphere heavenly worlds, or amongst human beings. So if you want to get a good rebirth, either as a deity or to come back to the human world and to be living under satisfactory conditions in the human world, then you should engage in a multitude of good deeds, bodily, verbal, and mental. So this is the Buddha's gentle method, that he probably uses this when he finds disciples who tend to be gentle, obedient, receptive, intelligent, responsive, humble, patient, of good qualities, since that method, the gentle method, will work with them. But the Buddha doesn't attract only people who are gentle, obedient, receptive, and responsive, but he gets a lot of, he attracted a lot of disobedient, rebellious, opinionated, recalcitrant, rebellious, undisciplined, unruly, boisterous people who became his disciples. So for them, the Buddha has to use a different approach, the rough method, the stern method. So those are the ones who engage, or at least they're inclined to engage, in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. So what is bodily misconduct? The 3 chief kinds.
Killing.
Yeah.
Stealing.
Sexual misconduct, stealing.
Right.
Stealing. Yeah.
Right, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Then verbal misconduct, the 4 kinds of verbal misconduct.
Same. Lying.
Yeah.
Divisive speech.
Right.
Speech. And
What was the third?
harsh speech.
Yeah.
Divisive speech. And what was the 4th one? Gossip.
Right. Yeah, it's just the things that one is abstaining from when one is practicing good conduct. So lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and gossip or idle chatter. So that's verbal misconduct. Then mental misconduct, 3 kinds of mental misconduct.
Covetousness, ill will, and wrong view.
Right, exactly. Covetousness, that's the greed to want to get the possessions of others. Ill will, wishing harm for others. And wrong view. And that means, as a kind of mental misconduct. Wrong view is the view that rejects or undermines the basis of morality, the basis of ethics. And so the Buddha will point out these different types of misconduct, and then he'll mention the realms of existence to which the wrong conduct leads. So this is a way of, you have to say, of scaring the unruly disciples into changing their conduct. So he'll describe the hells, point to the animal realm, and describe the realm of the afflicted spirits, also called the hungry ghosts. So those are the spheres of rebirth for those who habitually engage in wrong conduct. Okay, then often the Buddha will get disciples who's probably most disciples who have a combination of different characteristics or qualities, to some extent honest, obedient, heedful, other times inclined to be unruly, boisterous, heedless. And so the Buddha will use the combination of both methods for instructing them. And so in this way, the Buddha now has covered the three types of methods of training. But then Casey, the horse trainer, says, if you get a disciple and he won't submit to discipline by any of these methods, how do you deal with him? And then the Buddha says, well, if he won't submit to any of these methods, then I kill him. So the Buddha is using maybe a shock technique here in order to maybe sustain the horse trainer's interest. And so Casey, the horse trainer, says, but it isn't proper or allowable for the Buddha to destroy life, but you say, I kill him. What do you mean? Then the Buddha explains, when I get a person who won't submit to any of these methods, then the Tathagata, that's he himself, thinks he shouldn't be spoken to and instructed. And then his wise fellow monks also think he should not be spoken to and instructed. And then this is the key point here, that in the discipline of the noble ones, this is what is meant by killing. When the Buddha thinks he shouldn't be spoken to and instructed, and when his fellow monks think he shouldn't be spoken to and instructed. And then Casey says, indeed, he is well slain when you think he shouldn't be spoken to and instructed, and so on. And then Casey, the horse trainer, then declares himself a follower of the Buddha. He goes for refuge. And now as for this method of not speaking to a disciple who won't submit to the other three methods, I was trying to think whether there were any examples of that being applied during the Buddha's own lifetime. And no examples came to mind just when I sat down to think about it. But there's
Chana, Venerable Chana.
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to, but that didn't take place during the Buddha's own lifetime. And I have the passage here. This is when the Buddha was about to pass into his final nirvana. He was giving some last instructions to the monks. And then he says, when I am gone, then let here it's translated the higher penalty, but the Pali expression is, let me get my type. Do you see what I typed? Does it come through?
Yes, Bhante.
Yes.
Yeah.
It says Brahmadana,
Right. Danda, danda.
Danda.
Yeah. Yeah, the N and D should have dots under them. It's called Brahma Danda. Danda is punishment, and Brahma in ancient India is the supreme god, but here it could be taken as supreme. So this is the supreme punishment. And so the Buddha says to Ananda, when I am gone, let the supreme punishment be imposed upon the monk Channa. Then Ananda says, what do you mean by the supreme punishment? And then the Buddha says, the monk Channa, he may say what he wants, but the monks shouldn't converse with him or teach him or admonish him. Yeah, do you know who Channa was? This Channa.
Yes, Bhante.
Who was he?
Charioteer.
Channa is the individual that took him to the river Niranjana and they crossed over. So he looked after the horse,
Right.
Kantaka.
Yeah, very, very good. Okay. Yeah, Channa was formerly, when the Buddha was living at home, Channa was the charioteer who would drive the Buddha around, but he was still a bodhisattva. And so, and then when the Buddha renounced and left the palace in order to go to lead the ascetic life, Channa was the one who led him out of the palace and brought him to the river. So after the Buddha attained enlightenment and then came back and taught the Sakyans, Channa, who had been formerly the charioteer, Channa wanted to become a monk and he got ordained, but he was so proud after he was ordained that he didn't follow the system of training, the discipline, but he would do whatever he wants, thinking that he was in a position of privilege. And so because of his arrogant behavior, the Buddha told the monks to impose this supreme penalty on Channa. And when they did that, then Channa became really upset and miserable. And I think he even fainted when he realized that nobody was talking to him. And then he decided to change his ways. And eventually he came to Ananda. And Ananda gave him a discourse on dependent origination. And then Channa eventually he attained arhatship. Yeah, this discourse, the Channa, is in the Anguttara Nikaya, the part 3, the chapter on the 5 aggregates. I think it's sutta number 88. It might be chapter 22, sutta number 88, somewhere around there. Okay, so that is killing in the discipline of the noble ones. When somebody doesn't follow the discipline, first you have to give them a chance. You have to criticize them, correct them, point out their faults, give them a few chances to correct themselves. But when they don't listen after at least three times, then you just give them the silent treatment. Okay, let us move on. We'll take a few suttas, then we'll take questions. Okay, this is a short and simple sutta. So here the Buddha speaks about the 4 qualities of a thoroughbred horse, a king's thoroughbred horse, which makes that horse worthy of the king, worthy to be considered a factor of kingship. So what are the 4? So the 4 are rectitude, speed, patience, and mildness. And then the Buddha applies this to the case of a monk. So he says there are simile that there are 4 qualities that make a monk worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of salutation, the supreme field of merit for the world. What are the 4? Rectitude, speed, patience, and mildness. And in Pali, these qualities would be, let me just get the sutta. So in Pali, they are Ujjava, Java, Kanti, and Soracha. So the word Ujjava is derived from the word Uju, which means literally straight. And so by straight is meant being honest, candid, not being crooked, deceitful, hypocritical, cunning, or scheming. So being straight, straightforward, honest, sincere. Those are some of the qualities that enter into this Ujjava. I'm going to skip over Java. I'll come back to Java. It's not Java, like the island in Indonesia, but it's Java. The third quality, of course, it's quite obvious. It's Khanti, patience. And we'll see why patience is meant. And then the 4th quality is mildness. It's being gentle, humble. We could say also receptive, responsive. So those are some of the qualities that enter into Soracha. Then speed, to find out what is meant by speed, I found a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Nines, which explains how it also uses a comparison of monks to horses. And here it explains how a person is like a wild colt who possesses speed. And possessing speed is that the monk understands as it really is. This is suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path. Then the next sutta says, so what is meant by possessing speed? That one destroys the 5 lower fetters and becomes an anagami. And in the next sutta, how does one possess speed? One has the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas, the destruction of the taints. So that means the attainment of arhatship. So putting these 3 suttas together, it's through speed that one attains stream entry, or going higher, the stage of non-returner, or going to the highest, the stage of arhatship. But what unites them is seeing and understanding the 4 noble truths. So speed, we could say, represents what quality in the Buddha's training?
Bhante, it'd be right view.
More than that.
Wisdom.
Right, exactly. It's panya, wisdom. Okay, so these would be the qualities that make the monk worthy of gifts and so on, that the monk has rectitude, that is honesty and sincerity, being straightforward, not crooked and deceptive, having sharp wisdom, rapid wisdom to penetrate and understand things as they are, being patient, because when one is in training, one has to accept a lot of hardships and difficulties. And during the Buddha's time, living the monastic life was very, very difficult. Now we have these big buildings and we get our food very easily. You just hear the bell ring and then we go to the alms hall to receive the food. But in the Buddha's time, if we need anything special, we just give a telephone call to one of our donors and say, I need this, I need that. But in the Buddha's time, life as a monk was very, very difficult. You have to travel maybe 8 months of the year, walking on foot, often living out in the open, getting mosquito bites, bites by other insects, danger from wild animals, inclement weather, and so forth. So patience and then mildness, when being humble, gentle, receptive, and responsive. Okay, so those are the 4 qualities that make one worthy of gifts. Okay, now we have a very relevant sutta, very important, relevant sutta, one of my favorites. This is on, again, it's on 4 kinds of thoroughbred horses found in the world. This is number 113. So this, I think, sutta, it's not only for monks, but for everybody. So first we have the 4 kinds of horses. So the first kind of horse is stirred and acquires a sense of urgency as soon as it sees the shadow of the goad. I want to get the key expression here. The key words. Yeah, so what's being rendered as being stirred is the verb sangvijati, and then acquiring a sense of urgency, it's apajati sangvega. So sangvega, sangvegam. Sangvega is the noun which is derived from this verb. So sangvega is, in the Buddha's training, it's an extremely important quality, because this is a quality, as we're going to see, that motivates a person to enter the Buddha's path. And I would say the opposite of sangvega. So in English, we don't have a very good word to translate sangvega. So I use a makeshift construction, the sense of urgency. But I think the basic vega is a kind of wave or current. And so metaphorically, it's a wave or current that goes through a person and causes some kind of agitation to set in. And sangvega, maybe the opposite of sangvega, is complacency. So ordinarily, we go through life thinking everything is going to go along in accordance with our wishes. Everything is okay, nothing to get excited about. Things are completely normal. Things go as expected. And then there occurs some event or a series of events that breaks up that complacency, that shakes us out of that sense of complacency. So we realize that it's not the case that everything is going to be okay. It's not the case that we're living in a state of inherent security, but rather we're sort of walking even in our normal day-to-day life. It's like in front of me right now, right out the window, there's a lake here in the middle of the monastery. And during the winter, when the temperature goes below freezing, the lake freezes over the surface of the lake. And you might think you test the surface of the lake and you think, it's turned to ice. I can walk across. Yeah, in fact, this happened with a monk who was living here a couple of years ago. He thought, I can walk across the lake. And he got like about halfway through across the lake. Then he put his foot down on a piece of the ice, and the ice cracked beneath his foot, and his foot went into the lake. Fortunately, it wasn't more than the foot getting into the lake. But normally we are like walking in our day-to-day life. We're walking on a lake in which the surface of the lake is frozen over. So you can go walking across thinking everything is okay. I can get across the lake to the other side without any problem. But then something happens in our ordinary life. The ice starts to crack beneath our foot. And then we realize that we are in perpetual danger and we have to do something to secure ourselves. So that is what happens when the Samvega sets in. It's like the recognition that there is danger in life, that our life is not enveloped in a protective coat of armor, that we're not living in this comfortable world where everything goes according to our wishes, but things happen that cut against the grain of our expectations, and then we awaken to the real dangers that confront us, and we realize we have to do something to escape those dangers. And then if we encounter the Buddha Dharma, then we set out on the path. Okay, so now let's come back to the simile of the horses. So we have one horse gains the sense of urgency as soon as it sees the shadow of the goad. It realizes, if I don't start acting, that goad, that whip is going to strike me and hurt me. So it thinks, what can I do to satisfy the trainer? So that is the best kind of horse. But there's another kind of thoroughbred horse, which is a bit more complacent. So when it sees the shadow of the goad, it still thinks everything is all right, nothing to worry about. But then the goad strikes the hairs. Maybe the horse trainer takes the goad and rubs it against the hairs as a kind of threat. And then the horse gets filled with a sense of urgency and thinks, I better start following the horse trainer. The third kind of horse, the more sluggish, more complacent horse, isn't stirred to urgency even when the hairs are struck by the goad. But then the horse trainer might strike the goad lightly against the hide of the horse. Then the horse picks up and thinks, I'd better start following the trainer. But then the fourth horse isn't even stirred to a sense of urgency. not even stirred to start taking up the training when its hide is struck by the goad, but it's stirred to a sense of urgency when the horse trainer takes the goad and hits it hard against the back of the horse so that the pain goes right down to the bones. Then finally the horse thinks, I'd better start following the horse trainer. So those are the 4 kinds of thoroughbred horses. Then the Buddha says that there are 4 kinds of excellent thoroughbred people living in the world. So what is the 4? So the first kind of person hears in such and such a village or town, some woman or man has fallen ill or died. So he becomes acquainted with illness and serious illness or death through hearsay. And this one, as soon as he hears about the death, maybe it's a person, a neighbor that he knows or knows about, hears that they've fallen very ill or died, then they acquire that sense of urgency. And then what continues, when he's stirred by a sense of urgency, then he strives carefully and thoroughly. And then through the striving, he realizes the supreme truth with the body, and having pierced it with wisdom, he sees it. Yeah, we can take the Pali here. It's quite interesting. Yeah, the word pahitato means one who is resolute. So when he's stirred up by the sense of urgency, then he becomes very diligent, very heedful, very dedicated to the practice. And so he's ardent, diligent, and resolute. And then when he's resolute, then the expression used, he realizes the supreme truth. We have saram parama satcham. So this is explained as a synonym for nibbana. And it said that he realizes nibbana with the body. The commentary explains this. I think I had a comment on this. The commentary says, explains body as the mental body, and the supreme truth as nibbana, and wisdom as the wisdom of the path, together with insight. So the commentary explains the body as being the mental body. But it seems to me that even though, of course, one has to realize the supreme truth with the mind, not with the physical body, but perhaps the text uses the word body here to indicate that this experience is so powerful, it has such a strong impact that it is almost as if one is realizing it with the physical body. Of course, it's the mind that has to understand the supreme truth, but that penetration, that realization impacts the whole organism itself. It transforms the physical body. So it's as if one were realizing the truth with the body. And then the next is that one sees it, and then this ati vija comes from the verb. one has the verb vijati, which means like to pierce. And it's used in relation to archery, when the archer takes a bow and arrow and then shoots the arrow and hits the target. You say vijati, he pierces the target. And then ati is an intensifier. It's like going right through it, piercing right through it. And one pierces it, not with a physical arrow, but panyaya, with wisdom. So one uses wisdom as the arrow to pierce the supreme truth. And he sees it, pierces it and sees it. So this is like the first thoroughbred horse who's stirred to that sense, the person who's like the first thoroughbred horse, who's stirred to that sense of urgency just on hearing that some other person has fallen sick or died. Then the second case, one sees that a woman or man has fallen really ill or has died. A little bit, this is like the experience, according to the traditional legend of the Buddha, that the Buddha had to take that journey outside the palace, and then he saw the sick man, or the old man, the sick man, and the corpse. So one sees one who is ill or died, then one is stirred to the sense of urgency. In the third case, it's getting closer. In this case, it's not that one hears about somebody falling sick or dying, not that one sees somebody falling sick or dying, but it gets closer. A relative or family member has fallen ill or died. And now during this time of the COVID pandemic, probably a lot of people are now in this situation. Every day, I have to say, I'm a victim of complacency too. So every day I watch the news in the evening, and then the news reporter says, today, this day, 1,800 people have died from COVID. Next day, maybe 2,400 people have died. Another day, 3,000 people have died. And I'm sitting back here and I'm enjoying my evening drink. Does it have enough sugar in it? No, let me make it a little sweeter. And I think everything's going to be okay. And I get tired. I think, should I meditate? Nah, let me go to sleep. Yeah, so 1,800 dead, 2,100 dead, 2,400 dead, 3,200 dead. It's not going to happen to me. I'm safe and secure. Yeah, so I'm a lazy horse. Okay, but if you have a relative or family member who falls ill or dies, or a friend who dies, then it should, and you see how actually see, or if you visit, if you're a healthcare worker, a doctor, a nurse, healthcare worker in the hospital, you see people coming in with the COVID, getting really sick, difficulty breathing, needing emergency care, and then many dying. And that should stir one to a sense of urgency. And then the fourth case, that you yourself get stricken by these painful bodily feelings. You fall ill, or otherwise you get injured, and then you experience these extremely painful bodily feelings, which are racking, sharp, piercing, disagreeable, taking one's vitality away. Then that induces that sense of urgency. And so when you recover and regain your strength, then you strive and penetrate the supreme truth. So those are the 4 kinds of people like thoroughbred horses. Okay, maybe this will be enough for today. Maybe we could see if we have some questions. Remember, if you want to ask a question, you'll find in the box, the participant box, at the bottom, you'll find a symbol for a hand, and then you click that symbol, and then then I'll take the questions in the order that they come up. Okay, first is from Young. You unmute. Young?
Ante.
Okay, go
May
ahead.
I ask, can you hear me?
Yeah.
May I ask, in the Java star, Java and Ajava, is it related, like the opposite of Java?
Ajava is not related at all to the word Java. Java means speed. Ajava means, as I said, honesty or rectitude or honesty.
I was wondering, Ajava carrying meaning of a bit slowness of wisdom.
Say again?
I was wondering, Ajava carries the meaning of slow wisdom?
No, it has nothing to do. It's not it's not related to Java at all. Java means fast or speedy. Ajava comes from the word uju. And the reason it appears uju leads to Ajava is because of the Sanskrit. There's a little lesson in Sanskrit.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
In Sanskrit, the word is that in Pali becomes uju is riju. And so from riju, when we want to turn it into a noun, in Sanskrit, the r sound becomes r, and then it gets Java. So it becomes arja. Yeah, so from riju, we get the noun as arjava. Yeah, but it has no relation to the word Java, completely different.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, see you. And when you finish with your question, then you lower the hand. There's a symbol for lowering the hand. See you.
Yeah, hi, Bhante. The simile of where you used Venerable Channa, and killing of in Buddha's discipline by not teaching the Dhamma. I thought that meant like essentially that person would not get Dhamma again even after encountering Buddha or one of his disciples. Whereas in Venerable Channa's case, it led to a different ultimate conclusion or different ultimate outcome, because you said he actually got Dhamma and he finally became an Arahant. So he actually did not die.
Yeah, because what's called the Brahmadanda, that supreme punishment, it doesn't mean that the person will never get any Dharma instruction indefinitely into the future, but it's a way of disciplining the person in order to getting them to change their way of thinking and acting. So when they're subjected to that silent treatment, in the case of Channa, then he came to realize, why is nobody talking to me? Why have all of the monks, when I come to ask for instruction, they're just turning away from me? Then somebody, I don't remember who, it's in the Vinaya, somebody explained to him that they're all giving you the silent treatment because you're just a fool. You're just an unruly fool. And then he was filled with a sense of remorse. And then he came to the monks and he apologized, confessed his wrongdoing, and then changed his way.
Because of the simile bhante, when the horse is dead, I mean, there's no second chance.
Yeah, it doesn't work in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Shouldn't take too literally. Okay, Ravi, Sarah?
Thanks, Bhante. Bhante, would you be able to kindly mention names of the scholars who claim that Abhidhamma was not taught by the Buddha, Bhante? And
Yeah,
also,
I think questions should be related to the topic of the class today. But if you want, let me see if I could find the book.
sorry, Bhante, just asking as a continuation from last week, Bhante, because I couldn't ask that.
Let me just take a quick look. Frau Wallner is a German scholar. Can I type in someplace? I mean, but this is pretty much, I mean, it's almost like a universal conclusion amongst Buddhist scholars, academic Buddhist scholars.
Because Bhante, for one, in the first Buddhist council, also Abhidhamma is said to have been sort of, considered as a.
Actually, it's not the case. If you look in the Vinaya Pitaka, the oldest account of the first council, it said Upali, who specialized in the Vinaya, was the one who rehearsed the Vinaya material, and Ananda was the one who compiled or who rehearsed the Dhamma material. But no mention is found in the oldest sources of the Abhidhamma as being rehearsed at the first council. But the commentary, because the commentary comes several centuries later after the Abhidhamma took shape, so the commentary will mention the Abhidhamma being rehearsed at the first council.
Okay, Bhante, thanks.
Yeah, so it's Eric Frau Wallner, I think it's called Researches in Abhidharma Literature, something like that. But there are a lot of scholars who have done research and sketching the historical development of the Abhidharma. Lance Cousins has something, though his articles are difficult to find, but if you search for his name, and then you maybe look for Abhidhamma, you might find something on the internet. And then Venerable Analeo also has a book called The Dawn of Abhidharma. Or maybe it's Abhidharma. Okay, let's take the questions now related to the present topic.
Thanks very much, Bhante.
Okay, Kenneth. Kenneth the Ebro. Oops. Maybe. Okay, we'll go next. Devin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is about the third sutta that we talked about today. And I'm wondering if the Buddha is kind of implying any sort of preference for these four variants of people. So for instance, might it be better if you gain this sense of urgency if you only heard about someone being sick instead of only acquiring it once you yourself have gotten sick? Is there any sort of implication that one might be better than the other, or are they kind of treated equally?
No, there's an order.
Okay.
The one who has, I say, the most heedful one, the one who is most earnest, is the one who is stirred to a sense of urgency simply by hearing about somebody falling sick or dying.
Okay,
And
okay.
the most sluggish one is the one who has to wait until he falls ill himself in order to start striving.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay. You're wrong?
Yes, Monday. My question is about the simile of thoroughbred. Is thoroughbred considered always referring to someone with the penetrating wisdom who has seen the path? Has it always been used to refer to meditation, a meditator with the wisdom?
For that, I would have to really do a search to see whether there are any suttas which describe somebody who has those qualities who doesn't yet have the penetration.
Okay, thank you.
I would assume, though, in the Buddha's time, since there were many who had the penetration, that it would refer to somebody who has reached one of those levels.
Okay, thank you, Bande.
Yeah, I would say so, especially here in this sutta number 112. It speaks about the person as being an unsurpassed field of merit for the world. So that would almost have to indicate that this is a person who's reached one of the levels of Aryan disciple, of being an Aryan disciple.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay, okay.
Yes, Bante. Shall I go ahead and ask the question I was going to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bante, I was looking at the Dasa Kusal and covetousness or abhijja. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Bante? I'm having difficulty wrapping my head around it.
Yeah, the word abhijja is used with several nuances or several applications. So it has a sense of strong desire, this sort of more literal sense. And in certain contexts, it will mean almost equivalent to kama chanda, almost like equivalent to sensual desire. So sometimes it has the nuance of sensual desire.
Bante, could it be like an extreme form of jealousy? Is that?
Wait, let me continue, please.
Yeah, sure, sorry.
Okay, so we come to the text, the standard passages on the 5 hindrances, the overcoming of the 5 hindrances. Abhijja is used in certain context, in that context, sometimes in place of the hindrance of sensual desire. So it's said that the disciple who goes into seclusion overcomes abhijja, dispels abhijja. He dwells with a mind free from abhijja. And we know from this that it's being used in place of kama chanda, the ordinary. Okay, but as one of the 10 types of unwholesome karma, or 10 types, or one of the 3 types of mental misconduct, abhijja doesn't just mean sensual desire, but it means the active desire to acquire the possessions of others, a strong desire to acquire the possessions of others. So like ordinary sensual desire arises, in almost every person. In that case, it's not one of the types of mental misconduct, or it's not one of the types of unwholesome karma. It's not an unwholesome kamma pata, unwholesome course of karma. It's unwholesome. It's an unwholesome mental state, but it doesn't generate that unwholesome course of karma. The abhijja that functions as an unwholesome course of karma is that craving that takes on the role of desiring to gain possessions of others. Yeah, okay, so that would be at least two of the senses of abhijja.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, now we come back to Maricela.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. Good morning, and thank you for the teachings. My question was about harsh speech as one of the speeches not to engage in. And a couple weeks ago, we discussed the praise and criticism.
Yeah.
And in that discussion, we talked about different times that the Buddha used harsh speech to criticize words like "you foolish man." I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
In Majjhima Nikaya, I don't know, 103, I think, or something like that. So I just wanted to maybe learn a little more about how we reconcile these kind of clear four ways of speech, and when we see the Buddha also using sometimes harsh speech in particular moments, how do we think through that? Thank you. Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. Sort of the standard answer would be that what's labeled harsh speech is speech which is motivated by anger and ill will. And so the Buddha, when he speaks in that way, it's not that he's harboring anger and ill will in his mind, but he wants to discipline the person. And so, and this would be a kind of stubborn, obstinate, rebellious person. So the way to discipline that person is to use sometimes these stern expressions to sort of cut them down, or cut down their rebellious tendencies, and to make them humble. I guess that would be the explanation. So the words sound to us, certainly to me too, they sound harsh. I would think if I were in that position, I wouldn't speak like that to another person, but I would just try to correct the person. But the Buddha must know that there's no other way to change that person except to use some strong words in relation to that person. That would be my explanation.
Thank you, Bhante. That's clear.
Okay. So I'll take just two more questions. So Brenda.
Hello, Bhante. Thank you. I just wanted to go back to your discussion of covetousness of others, for others' possessions. Is that related to sort of an illicit feeling of wanting something that someone is intending to keep? It doesn't go into the area of someone who is like on this website where people are selling their possessions. And so covetousness can arise when you're looking at that, but they're willing to sell them. So is there a fine distinction there, or is it?
No, I think what you said first is that it's a desire to get the possessions of others in an illicit way.
Illicitly. Okay, I thought so. I just thought I would check that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and then Kathy.
I don't have a question. I just want to quickly comment on the good sense of humor of Buddha when he responded, if a person to be tamed by me won't submit to it, then I kill him. I think it's a good sense of humor on the Buddha side. And I can imagine that Cassie's eye must be wide open when he said, well, but killing is the noble one's discipline. So I enjoyed this very much.
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether humor would be the word that I would use, but I would say it's maybe delivering a shock message to sort of arouse Casey's interest and curiosity by making a shocking statement. This is sort of the shock value of the statement.
And also quickly on the good, the four, I feel one probably also as a lay person, one probably need to work from when one gets sick all the way up to to become one, when they only hear about it, then you arouse this sympathy or sense of urgency. That's my comment.
Okay. I didn't quite catch it. Could you say it again?
Oh, on the second half of 113, when you said the most heedful one is when one hear about someone get sick,
yeah,
and to arouse the sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And the most sluggish one is when one who gets sick, then the sense of urgency aroused.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we probably all need to learn from the very basic. From when one gets sick, then you can relate to when you hear of someone who gets sick.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. In fact, there's a sutta in which the Buddha says that there are 5 themes that should often be reflected upon by any of his disciples, whether monastic or layperson, whether male or female. And the first 3 are, I am subject to old age, I've not escaped old age. I'm subject to illness, I've not escaped illness. I'm subject to death, I've not escaped death. And so in that way, you're constantly reminding oneself that one is vulnerable to those things. And then that helps to counteract that kind of complacency, self-satisfaction in which we ordinarily live. Okay, we'll have to end. Yeah, we'll have to end for the day now.
The other 2.
So let me get the file for sharing the merits. I can't find it right off. So I'll just recite the verse for sharing the merits. And so let us think particularly now of any relatives or friends of any of our own relatives or friends who might be ill with the virus or upset in any way, worried, anxious, agitated, or those who are suffering because of difficult economic conditions, and we'll share the merit with them. But I'll recite the verses for sharing the merit with the devas. Akasata Trabhumata Deva Nagam Hidika Punyantang Anamoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Trabhumata Deva Nagam Hidika Punyantang Anamoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Trabhumata Deva Nagam Hidika Punyantang Anamoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagopadaya vici hetato etantare satakayu papanna rupya rupicha sanya sanya dukkha pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu,
sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu Bante, sadhu.
sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Good health to you. Enjoy the
Thank
nice
you,
Bante.
Enjoy the lunch
Thank you,
and have
Bante.
nice
Okay.
weekend.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bante. Be safe, be well. Sadhu,
Thank
sadhu,
you.
sadhu.
Thank you, Bante.
So nice to see you, Bante.
Wonderful to see you, Bante.
Okay, thank you.
See you, Bante. Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
Bante.
everyone. Have
Bye,
a nice
Bante.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
See you all.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Bye, Bante.
Bye.